If you're wondering if it's worthwhile to set up ClickUp for content creation when you're managing multiple clients, this video is for you. And I'm here to tell you that absolutely with a 100% certainty, yes, it is. And why is that? So I'm going to show you exactly what I think people typically think of when they're using ClickUp for content creation. So anybody has a task list that they have to go through to create a content calendar, right? So if you do content for a client, you create a monthly content calendar, you have your tasks that ladder up to actually completing that milestone, right? So for me, what I'll typically do is create a content framework first, then go in and write the copy, design the creatives, get the client revisions incorporated, then we schedule. Very simple. But what about where you're actually completing those tasks, right? When we say write copy, well, where are you writing the copy? And when you're designing the creatives, where are you putting the finished product? Where is the client leaving their revisions and their feedback? And how do you know the stage of each post and whether it's scheduled or not? So if you're using a content calendar like this, and it's okay if you are, because I did for a very long time, it might look a little something like this with like a trillion different tabs, or you've got a column for month and there are so many different columns. It's just not the best experience. That was my feeling, and what ultimately led me to ClickUp was to actually use it to replicate my workflows. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So when we're talking about your posts, and we were saying each post needs to ultimately go through each of those different tasks in your task list, right? So we're talking about write copy, create the creatives, like all of that. So I use that, or I use ClickUp to replicate that content flow from beginning to end, right? And what does that look like? So here is my very simple social content creation workflow template. This is if you are really only creating content by yourself, you don't have a designer, you really only have one client who's giving you feedback. It's super simple. And like I have a couple different views here, and the views are essentially meant to replicate the different phases that each post goes through in the content creation process. So at the calendar build phase, this is ultimately where we're just creating the content, right? We're like putting it together step by step. And that can really look like, first, if your first step is to create a content framework, like I typically will do, then it would just look like very simply the name of the post idea, what type of post it is, what the goal of it is, what the summary kind of that you're thinking. And then from there, once those post ideas are in, we have all the subsequent kind of elements, which is our post copy, our hashtags, a place to put our finished creatives. If you like to have design inspiration included for yourself when you're building out a content framework, you can have columns for that as well. And then if you're writing copy for carousels, then there is columns for that as well. So there's a lot of columns when it comes to creating our content, right? But let's say our post is ready now for the client to review it. What does that look like? So if we were using our spreadsheet here, how would we let the client know which posts are ready for review? Would we wait until they're all done so we don't bother letting them know until then? It's just not as simple as having a specific place where only posts that are ready for review are there for them to look at. So I have an approvals and scheduling view that I love. So there's two purposes to this view, which is one, to get the client's feedback. And so very simply, they only have the views they need. And two is to, once they're finished reviewing, then I would have a place to schedule my posts, right? So I'm only going to be scheduling the posts that are ready for scheduling. So this is really helpful if maybe you don't do full 30 days of content at a time and you're kind of just like working at them as you go along. So there's some that are ready for review, some that aren't, even just having it move through the process. So what I mean by that is, say, for example, this post is ready for review. Then I would simply select the status review that I have set up here. And then I have a filter in place that says if the final post status is not set, then it won't be here. So if I refresh this, this will have moved out of this view and is now in this view, in the approvals and scheduling view, because it's ready for review, right? So I just love the simplicity of having posts only present in the view at which they are in the process, if that makes sense. So these posts are ready for review, and I know that because the final post status is set to review. So the client's going to come in here and they're very simply going to be able to see what type of post it is, what the goal is, what the post copy is, and the finished creative. There are a couple extra columns there for the publishing aspect that they don't necessarily need, but doesn't matter. It's not too cluttered to include it all in one. So the client would go in and let's say they're going to give us a feedback on this one. Can you change the creative to our green brand color? Something like that. So we now have their feedback and they would say revise. Okay, we would go in and we would see which post needs revisions and we could do those revisions, but then we would flip it into approved. And then once it's approved, I have an automation set up where it's updating our publishing status so that it now says ready. So again, here's another indicator that happens just naturally through the process of the next step that needs to be taken. So as somebody who's like, hey, I'm coming in to do publishing now, I would know that only the posts that have the publishing status of ready are ready to be scheduled. So it's so simple and easy to move posts through all of the process without having to do it all at once and getting confused as to which post is in which part of the process. So let's move this one into approved as well. And then it updates the publishing status. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay. So if I'm now, the client has said, hey, I've given you my feedback, I'm ready, like we've made the changes, then I'm just going to go in and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to now go through the scheduling process. And let's say like these are checked. Maybe I've got a Facebook share. I now know that I have to include the link in bio, which actually we can add the column, which is here. Source being if there's a link to a particular blog or whatever, then we are going to include that. If we have a link in bio, you have to have a source, right? So that's also been included as well here. So I would just go through the process of either saying they're scheduled, or alternatively, if you are somebody like me who doesn't like to use third-party publishing tools, and you can't actually for stories typically when there's like elements like a quiz or not a quiz or a poll or whatever, you can't have all things go through a scheduling tool. Sometimes you have to do them manually. But what do you do with those manual posts? You create a little note on your notepad, a reminder in your calendar. What about if it showed up in your ClickUp task list where you are every day anyway, looking at what you need to get done that day? So let's say we know that this one needs to be manually published. So then I'm going to assign it to myself. That's why that column is there. And I'm going to put it as manually published or manual publishing. And then when that day comes, when tomorrow comes, it will show up in my task list and I have everything I need to get that scheduled. And then I can just take myself off of the assignee and we're done with that one. It's awesome. It's so simple to move things through the process and imagine too navigating through multiple calendars, right? So that's the main thing when it comes to managing multiple clients is you would have all of these set up. We just have our social content creation workflow set up for each of our clients. So we could just pop from here to there to there. I don't have them set up for other clients right now. This is all an example account, so I can't do that. But you can imagine how easy it would be to bounce around from different client to different client and know exactly where everything is and in which stage. And then at the very end, we have a content library, which is just all of our content. All the finished pieces of content will show up here. And you can organize it by whatever you want. Like if you use content pillars, this could be organized by content pillars. I also have it set up so it will show photos. Let's see here. It says show images on cards. So I don't have any images attached to these right now because these are just posts that I've created, for example, but let me show you what that can look like. Let's use Shift and we're going to just attach that as an upload. And then it should show here. So we have now also a content library of every piece of content we've created, organized in whatever way you want. So that is why I feel that ClickUp is so powerful beyond just our typical task management of publish posts and create or write copy like we've got set up here in our social media management. allows us to streamline how we work without getting so bogged down in all of the columns and the information and everybody contributing in the same place with all this chaos. I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you like this kind of video. I love the workflows. I can show more workflows. Your imagination is the limit when it comes to how you can use ClickUp to replicate your workflows and how you can use automations to move posts or move anything through the phases of any sort of process. Okay, until next week for next tip. I'll talk to you then.